Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. On behalf of Climate Transparency and its International Secretariat, hosted by Iniciativa Climática de México, ICM, I want to welcome and thank you for joining us today for a virtual roundtable to commemorate the launch of the second edition of A Decade of From Paris Country Notes collection. This new edition expands the initiative with 4 additional G20 countries: Argentina, China, Russia, and Turkey, helping us move closer towards a fuller picture of how climate politics, narratives, and implementation have evolved across major economies over the past decade. The purpose of this project is not to rank countries or prescribe identical pathways. Rather, it is to create space for reflection, to better understand how national circumstances, political priorities, economic structures, and international dynamics have shaped climate policy trajectories since the adoption of the the Paris Agreement in 2015. One of the things we believe strongly at Climate Transparency is that climate policy is ultimately implemented nationally, but learned collectively. There is immense value in creating neutral, expert-led spaces where experiences can be shared openly across countries and regions, particularly at a moment of increasing geopolitical fragmentation and growing pressure on multilateral cooperation. Today's discussion is therefore an opportunity not only to present findings from the report, but also to hear directly from leading experts about how climate discourse has evolved domestically, what has enabled or constrained implementation, and where they see the next decade of climate governance heading, both nationally and internationally. Therefore, this morning here in Mexico, we are extremely grateful to our speakers for contributing their expertise and global perspective to this conversation. I will now introduce our 4 panelists today in the virtual roundtable. So first, from Argentina, we will be joined by Camila Mercur, Climate Policy Coordinator at FARN, one of Argentina's leading environmental policy organizations. Her work focuses on climate governance, environmental management, and sustainable development policy. Welcome, Camila. Also joining us from China is Professor Dr. Chen Xia from the Beijing University of Technology, an expert on sustainable production, energy transitions, and greenhouse gas mitigation. Her research on carbon footprints and climate transition has been widely published internationally. Welcome, Dr. Chensha. And now from Russia, we also welcome Dr. Igor Makarov, head of the School of World Economy and director of the Institute for the Economics of Natural Resources and Climate Change at the HSE University in Moscow. His work focuses on climate economics, green transition, and international political economy. Welcome, Dr. Makarov. And from Turkey, we are joined by Dursun Bas, researcher and coordinator on industrial decarbonization and climate policy projects with extensive experience working on the European Union and international environmental climate initiatives focused on Turkey's transition pathways. Welcome to the virtual roundtable, Dursun. And thank you everyone again for being here. Now, today's discussion will revolve around 3 main pillars. So we will first spend a few minutes talking about A Decade from Paris, which is the reflection on how the Paris Agreement has been one of the most important international treaties in human history, and what has happened after 10 years of almost universal adaptation and implementation. Then we will switch to speaking about the long-term vision versus the short-term demands, how during this past 10 years, all countries have faced periods of instability, reduced fiscal space, political transitions, and geopolitical pressures, and how each country has navigated those specific political moments. And finally, we will talk about how we need to achieve one global transition, but with many different approaches, and how these transitions would look different in each national context. Therefore, to kick off the discussion, I will invite our panelists to reflect on our first pillar, which is the reflection of the 10 years of the decade from Paris. Therefore, I will first ask our panelist from Argentina, Camila Mercur, to share with us her reflections on what have been the key successes and lessons learned from her own perspective and Argentina's, and what you consider, Camila, that did not go as expected. The floor is yours, Camila. Welcome.
Thank you, Carlos. I'm very glad to be here with all my colleagues as well. So, to start with, I think that one of the main successes of the Paris Agreement was establishing, let's say, a shared global direction. For the first time, almost every country agreed on the need for a common objective and a collective framework for climate action. 10 years ago, many discussions were centered on whether the transition was necessary or not. Today, I think that the debate is mostly about under what conditions the transition will happen or is happening, who bears the cost and responsibilities, and of course, who benefits from it. So I think it's now we have that big challenge. Also, I would say that we are also saw an important progress in climate governance frameworks. I mean, different at the national and subnational levels and public awareness. In Argentina, for example, the Paris Agreement process helped to strengthen the climate institutions, enabled the approval of we have a climate change law, and of course supported the development of national planning instruments such as the NDC and other national and subnational and sectoral plans and programs. But I think that another important lesson from these 10 years is that implementation happened in territories, not only in the international negotiations or national plans. So we are seeing that climate impacts are already affecting communities and ecosystems, and the transition itself also creates tensions and inequalities at the local levels, for example, with mining or fossil fuels extraction. And also, we are seeing that, for example, climate finance remains insufficient, highly unequal, and in many global south countries also is linked with debt. So I think that this is a kind of a lesson learned or what we are seeing nowadays. But nowadays in Argentina, I would say that we are experiencing some setbacks. So climate governance was downgraded, the updated NDC was delayed and wasn't submitted yet. And there's a strong contradictions between climate commitments and policies that promote fossil fuel expansion and extractivism. And just my last point, I think that another important lesson is that the transition are not only technological ones. So we learned that climate policies that ignore social justice, territorial inequalities, participation, or energy poverty tend to face stronger resistance and become less sustainable over the time. So thank you.
Thank you, Camila. That's very interesting to hear a reflection from a fellow Latin American country. I think one that we can definitely resonate from Mexico is the lesson that not only the technology elements of the transition are necessary but to take into account, but also the social aspects, the justice and equity in transition. Thank you. So now I will switch over to our panelist from China, Dr. Chen Xia. Welcome to our virtual roundtable. Dr. Shah, could you share some of the key successes and lessons learned of almost 10 years of, well, a little over 10 years of the adoption of the Paris Agreement? And very interested to hear your perspective from China, the now world leader in the energy transition and many technological aspects. Over to you, Doctor.
Um, Thank you, Carlos. I'm so happy to hear that. I'm so happy to hear that. So I'm thinking about in China in the past 10 years, I would like to from on the following four aspects. And the first one is the policies, national policies for the low carbon and zero carbon emission. In the past 10 years, from national level, our government announced
Dr. Shah, can you hear us? I think we've lost you.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. All right, no worries. I'm sure she'll be able to reconnect in a moment. Right. So meanwhile, why don't we move over to a neighbor of China, Russia, with welcoming to our virtual roundtable, Dr. Igor Makarov. Uh, Dr. Makarov, it's also a pleasure having you here, and we'd like to hear from your perspective of the past 10 years from Russia, one of the most important participants in the global energy market. What does these past 10 years of the Paris Agreement look like from your perspective? Any key successes, lessons learned, and what did not go as expected? What could you share with us?
Thanks, Carlos, and thank you for inviting me. I think that the major success is that Paris Agreement was concluded. It is not the ideal agreement, of course, but probably it was the best one that could be signed at that particular moment of time. And I think that it formed a sort of consensus of the global community that we are moving towards low carbon development. And it is very, very valuable itself. And this this thinking, this recognizing of consensus, this vision of low carbon development of the whole globe, it itself fosters a lot of bottom-up initiatives at absolutely different levels. So we see the number of carbon pricing initiative appearing in different countries. We see voluntary carbon markets appearing there and there. We see different standards of information disclosure, different ratings, different national declarations on zero carbon future, and many, many other initiatives, even at the corporate level. I think that without Paris Agreement, it could not be possible at all. At the same time, we see that it is not enough. Yeah, and we are not we are moving towards low carbon development, but we are far from zero carbon future, and we did not even start to reduce emissions actually globally, let alone moving to net zero. And it means that this bottom-up approach is probably not enough. And at the same time, it means that probably climate change should not be considered as something separate from the global landscape. It is impossible to cope with climate change and move to net zero without some decisive changes in different parts and different aspects of the global economy, including international financial system, including the transfer of technologies, including the current system of multilateral development banks, and including the increasing inequality both globally and within countries. So I think we saw for this decade that climate change is so much integrated into different aspects of the global economy, and it should not be considered as some separate problem, which can be solved with some mobilizing of some efforts, but without changing anything else. And the next challenge is what to do next. And the same is in Russia. So in Russia, Paris Agreement fostered a huge number of bottom-up initiatives. So Russia is one of the most climate skepticist countries in the world, I should say. And many people in Russia, they do not believe in climate change even now. But however, we see that a lot has been done in Russia for the last decade, and to the huge extent, it is because of Paris Agreement and because Russia joined this collaboration, this international collaboration. And we see huge progress in national planning. We see some initiatives at the corporate level. We see some pilot carbon pricing system in one of the Russian regions. We see the voluntary carbon market which appeared in Russia. We see the creation of system of green finance. I can't say that it is all enough, and a lot more could be done. But however, compared to what we had 10 years ago, I should say that it is a huge progress. And again, it is one of the fruit of Paris Agreement, with all these disadvantages and limitations that I already mentioned.
Thank you, Dr. Makarov. Very interesting points of view that you've mentioned. Especially, I find it interesting on what you mentioned on that Russia has a lot of climate skepticism, but even regardless that there's been policy mobilization during this past 10 years. And I think we can all agree that these 10 years have been probably the most active in the history of climate policy. Definitely, a lot of the changes were motivated by the Paris Agreement, and without this grand global agreement, it would have been very challenging to do so. And big systemic changes definitely need a milestone point to start. And I think we can agree that the agreement was that point of departure. Thank you, Dr. Makarov. So now I will move on to, well, I'd like to go back with Dr. Chen Xia, but I don't know if Dr. you are all right with your connection. Can you hear us properly? I'm afraid I can't hear Dr. Shang. Is that me or no? I think we can't hear her, right? Dr. Shah, I'm afraid we have some technical difficulties. I can see your video, but it's completely dark and we can't hear you. But don't worry, we'll move on to our colleague from Turkey and then we'll get back to you. Well, yes. While you have a bit of time to sort out the technology, I'm sure that will get working. Thank you, Dr. Shah. So now I'm going to look over westward, and that's not a political statement, more just a reference to the map because we're moving down to Turkey. So Dursun, thank you for joining us. Thank you again for being part of the roundtable. We're very interested in hearing the perspective of Turkey and your own perspective on what these 10 years have meant for climate change, both in your personal perspective, but also what you think about personally and professionally. The floor is yours, Dursun. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. I think Professor Chen also wrote through chat. Maybe you can also check the chat as well. And thank you as well for the organizing that event and moderating the session and having all our feedbacks to do valuable report. And I think I will not add so much, considering Camelia, Igor, and Dr. Chen notes regarding the global aspects of the Paris Agreement for the last decade. I would like to go forward regarding Turkey position. I mean, Turkey or Turkey, we changed our name, but time to time I will say Turkey or Turkey. Sorry for my fault, but it is okay. It's kind of habit. Anyway, but yeah, I will add only one note regarding kind of milestone for the Paris Agreement before and after 2020. I think there is a very distinct milestone regarding industrial decarbonization after 2020, thanks to climate targets through Paris Agreement and the first implementation of the Paris Agreement. What I saw through the last 10 years, energy transition is something very strong, but industrial decarbonization or industrial transition is something new compared to energy transition. And this is something new, but it also brings new problems regarding unilateral measures and the trade policy issues as well. But I think without Paris Agreement, there will be not so much discussions regarding industrial decarbonization, at least in our current situation in Turkey. But it could be generalized to the world as well, I think. And regarding the key successes for Turkey, I would like to say that but we have not a real practical success in Turkey, but Paris Agreement made a long-term direction for our climate targets, which became a part of long-term development policy as well, at least at narrative level, rather than practical in the field. But I think we have a half decade rather than 10 years of implementation period. Turkey became a party to Paris Agreement by the end of 2021. That's what I am talking for the last 5 years rather than for the last 10 years. But it made still progress in terms of providing its updated NDC and in terms of providing long-term strategy. And for the last year, Turkish government just issued a ETC law. It's called climate law, but it is more or less ETS law rather than fundamental and comprehensive climate law. I think this is also something, a kind of progress, but main lesson for the last 5 years is that from my side, without operationalization of the NDC targets, you cannot having a real progress for the climate governance and the reduction targets. In our case, we don't have sectoral binding legislation that says transport sector needs to reduce that amount, energy sector needs to that amount. We couldn't manage to convert our NDC to legislation which provides sectoral binding reduction targets. I think this is something very high lesson learned from my side. Without operationalization of the NDC, you cannot progress on climate policy governance. And one final note, I think what did not go as expected related to climate disinformation. For the last year or the year before, the Turkish government has started to work climate law preparation studies. At the same time, there was a huge climate disinformation campaign at the social media at that time for the last 3 years. I think we need to also understand sociological background of that climate disinformation kind of reactions as well. I think there is a kind of clickbait stuff. Everybody loves to write something on the social media to say something bad about climate and producing fake things. But I think climate communication, climate policy communication is something very important as a lesson learned. This is my kind of first insights at the first tour.
Thank you, Dursun. Those are very good first insights. I find, well, first of all, I have to personally apologize also for the pronunciation of Turkiye. I'm also kind of, English not my native language either, so just kind of working with that. My apologies, I will note that. And also on your point on industrial decarbonization, that's true. It's not the same from energy transition and also managing the emissions from those sectors. Very important. And the point you made on that, it's not really been a decade. It's been a decade from the signing, but not a decade from all of the countries ratifying the agreement and starting to implement. That's a very important distinction that I think we should keep in mind as we go forward. And in Turkey's case, that would be 10 years, only 5 years. So that's quite some progress in those 5 years. We'd like to hear more about it as we go along, Dursun. Thank you. Now, I think we've solved our technical issues. Dr. Shah, I think there's been a lot of suspense, so please tell us about your learnings from China. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And can you hear me now? And I think from China, I think firstly is our government announced lots continuously the policies and actions for low carbon and energy transition policies. For example, we have the national low carbon action for 5 years. As you know, in China, we have the 5 years development plan, and this year is the first year of the 15th 5 years planning. And at this 5 years planning, we also put our low carbon and climate control, change control, the action into this planning. And that is, I think this is very important to continuously, and the policy is continuous, and this is first. And the second, I think, education. This is since in the past 10 years, because I'm a professor in the university, and also I know from common people in China for high school, and if you talk about people, I think every people knows the climate change, know the word, and for fundamental school, they also have maybe the relevant that acknowledgement and the class talk about that climate change. And also in universities in the past 5 years, and we set up that the carbon neutral technologies college, and that is from the carbon neutral technologies development, and maybe there is a measure for that. So this is education is very important for our continue to achieve these low carbon goals, and I think this is the most impressive to me. And in the past 10 years, and also we know that China has already achieved lots of the progress for this since the past 10 years. First, for example, the energy structure has been significantly optimized in 2025, and the coal consumption declined to 51.4%. That I think it's 5 years ago, maybe it's it's more than 60, and 2005. And also we know that secondly, we put the circular economy and the green manufacturing have shifted from end of a pipe. So that is energy transition is not only for climate, not only for carbon dioxide, and it's for the green also the green transition. So we set up the goal is a pollution reduction pollution and carbon reduction, two goals. So that is for this. I think this is very important. And the third one, I think, we set up the carbon market. Because as we know, so in China, we also set up the national carbon market in several high energy consumption sectors. For example, steel, cemetery, and also buildings, something like that. And so this market, and to encourage the factories, enterprises to take part in these actions. And right now, how to calculate the carbon emissions is not only for a national level, is not only for government, and is for the factory, is for to make money. So everybody, this enterprises and factories pay more attention to that. That is. I can say my students, it's compared to 10 years ago, for them, it's easier to find the job because we do the carbon calculation from life cycle assessment. And we also, yes, I'm so happy to see my students from carbon reductions relevant, the major to find easier to find a job than 10 years ago. So from the lessons, I think I think for some right now the central government and the local government pay more attention to that, and also we inspire that the business and also to the factories to take part in these actions. But in some places, we found that they maybe pay more attention to economy. They don't have that ambition to do that, especially for some areas they are full of the coal. So so that is the difference. the different levels to take part in that. And also, I think the just transition is very important. So then now we have to pay more attention to when we get the energy transition from the high coal consumption. For example, for one province, they are full of the coal and they are very rich before, and because that they have the coal power plant withdraw, and also to the government to reduce their and reduce that the coal consumption go and maybe impact the economy and impact the workers. So that is so since this year, I think just the transition is more becoming more and more important, and we also pay more attention to do the research and how to get that low carbon and the green and the just transition. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shah. Very interesting insights from China. And I particularly find it interesting. And the first point you mentioned on education, I
Yeah.
think the awareness, the public awareness of the issue and better public knowledge that helps the entire sector transition. People know about this, a new degree specialized on green economy and this new skills that in this case your students have, and I'm also happy to hear that that helps them in the job market. Those are all very positive. Thank you very much for sharing that, Dr. Shah. Now I will move on to our next discussion pillar, which is the long-term vision versus the short-term demands. Now, something that we've seen in climate transparency discussions around the world is that all countries have faced some kind of challenges during these past 10 years. So some of them were reduced fiscal space to make these green investments, give guarantees. All of this puts pressure into public finance. There's political transitions, changes in leadership, elections, local, national, many different types of political changes, and also geopolitical pressures, changes in the global context that affect not only certain markets or export markets or the economy, but also affect internal political priorities as well. However, climate change will not wait, does not wait, and it will affect us whether we adapt to these changes or not. So it will continue growing if we fail to mitigate the causes and adapt to its effects. Therefore, the question that I want to put on the table is how, first of all, how countries can sustain climate ambition during periods of institutional or economic constraint without losing long-term direction. And we will go again with the same order. So I'm going to ask Camila to come in, especially because I think Argentina is right now undergoing a period of this type of political and economic transition and reprioritization. What insights and perspectives can you share in terms of how to keep the goal in mind, our North Star, while we sort out the short-term pressures? Go ahead, Camila.
Thank you, Carlos. It's a very good question and a difficult one, I would say. So I think that one of the biggest challenges, especially in countries like Argentina, is that climate action often competes with different, social and economic crises. We are experiencing that right now. So when you have inflation, poverty, debt pressures, institutional instability, or fiscal constraints, climate policies are frequently presented as secondary, on unrealistic, or even kind of like obstacles to the development. So the things that climate impacts do not stop during this social or economic crisis. Droughts, floods, heatwaves, energy poverty, food insecurity continue affecting people and territories regardless the political or economic context. So I think that, and taking the case of Argentina, I think that sustaining climate ambition requires connecting climate action with everyday realities and social priorities. If climate policies are only discussed in terms of emissions or international commitments, I think that they become, let's say, much more fragile politically. So in our region also, I think that climate action needs to be linked to issues such as energy access, public transport, housing, public health as well, food systems, decent jobs, and of course, adaptation. Otherwise, I think that there is a risk of being perceived just like as a disconnected like issue or problem from people's local concerns. And I would say that at the same time, we also need stronger and more stable institutions. So one of the lessons from the last decade is that climate governance becomes very vulnerable when it depends entirely on political cycles or changes in government. We are seeing right now with the new government, I mean, Milei's government. And finally, I think that we also need to speak more honestly about international inequalities. So many global south countries are being asked to accelerate transitions while they are facing debt. They have, of course, unequal access to finance and limits fiscal space. So I think that sustaining ambition without addressing these structural issues becomes very difficult, especially in these days. And just my last point is that climate admission cannot rely or should not rely on political will. So it also requires justice, international cooperation, and long-term institutions capacity. And also when we are seeing that at the national level, they are not pushing or promoting this agenda, we are seeing that there are other stakeholders such as, of course, civil society, academia, and in some cases, local authorities. I think that there we see a kind of like an opportunity to try to push this agenda and climate admission. Thank you.
Thank you, Camila. Dr. Shah, could you share with us some brief reflections on what your perspective is on how countries can sustain climate ambition without losing long-term direction?
Yeah, it's a good question because as we know, so far in our country during our a survey and something, and people also do worry about that, the long-term goal, especially for 1.5 degree, that's ambition. And in China, we also argued about that. Some people think maybe China maybe can achieve that for the 2 points, and the 1.5 maybe is not fit for and properly. Yeah, and so this is so in our colleague said we also now have the 1.5 protection. And I think this is normal to argue that, and so far, if we do not want to, we do want to lose our long-termness, I think it's firstly is for the innovation, techniques innovation, because we have maybe right now we focus on the research about some innovation techniques for prepare for that you can make more a job and make more get that economic development. That is very important to prepare. And for example, green hydrogens and also some very high tech the innovation techniques for prepare this one that in that now. And I think the first is the cooperation and the communication. And I think for example, in communication, maybe for these policies share, and also for the government, and also to understand that for the international communication is very important. As I know, for example, the European CBAM is puts a great pressure in China, and so people worry about that the energy security and the data security, and so we should to more understand that these policies, and also how to use data, and and that is very important. So for this negotiation and how to protect your nation's benefits, and to share the experience, and also the high tech, and that is very important. Yeah, that is what I think. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you very much, Dr. Shah. Now, Dr. Makarov, of course, the perspective from Russia is extremely valuable. If you could share any insights or reflections in terms of how to keep the long-term goal in mind while sorting out short-term pressures. Go ahead.
I should say that time horizons of planning, they really narrowed for the last years. And it is globally because of like COVID first, because of geopolitical issues and conflicts. And the same is in Russia, of course, because when some people in Russia joke that after they see the videos of oil refineries which are bombed by drones, and see the tons of pollution and everything which is going to the atmosphere, they start to reevaluate the effectiveness of their individual efforts, like to sort waste. And the same is with business. So we face sanctions now, and some companies, they have a lot of worries about their future, about whether they will exist in 5 or 10 years. And it is difficult for them to think about low carbon strategies for 30 years. It is a challenge, of course, and it is a huge challenge. I think that one of the responses and one of the arguments, not universal, of course, but still, is to start linking climate motivation with some other motivations, with short-term motivations. And we see Professor Chen Shah said that energy transition is not only about climate, it is also about green development and preventing pollution, which kills people right now. And in many Russian cities, the situation is the same. The pollution from like coal burning is huge, and it affects human health right now. Or another motivation is energy access and energy security. What we see now, given the events in the Gulf, that many countries start to evaluate their energy strategies based on the criteria of energy security, and renewables are better than oil and gas on this issue. And when the military conflict in Ukraine started in 2022, I personally thought that nobody will think about climate in Russia anymore in coming years. But I was mistaken, actually, because I was even surprised, but many Russian companies, they continue their climate strategies and climate action, and some new climate initiative appear in Russia for the last years. Why? Because many companies in Russia, especially those who are export-oriented, they understand that it is an issue of competitiveness, right? And that they will have no access to the foreign markets. They were worried very much about CBAM in the European Union. Now it is less relevant for Russian companies because most of the Russian goods are not delivered to Europe anymore anyway. Not because of CBAM, but because of other issues. We'll understand. But now they see what happens in China. And they think that they will have problems with access to Chinese market in some years. We do not know in which form. Probably CBAM won't appear in China in the form it appeared in the European Union. But however, it may be problematic to have access to, for example, Chinese markets with goods with high carbon footprints. So it is an example how long-term climate issues may be linked to the very short-term and very practical economic issues with which are at the center of interest of business right now. So I think that it is one of the ways how to resolve this conflict between short-term and long-term horizons. In some cases, it works, not everywhere probably, but however, it is better than nothing.
Thank you, Dr. Makarov. I see a trend there on linking climate with some other concerns also shared with Camila and Dr. Shah. Now, Dursun, what's your take on this? How would you reflect on the balance between the short term and the long term?
Yeah, I think I will repeat the rest of the speakers as well. I think framing the climate policy as a socioeconomic development problem rather than the result, rather than the problem itself, it should be framed as a socioeconomic development issue. And rather than using technical words, even GHG is something very technical, net zero, etc. We could use socioeconomic development narrative in order to make it real mainstream type of policy making. We could say public health, and we could say welfare. And as Camila has also mentioned that, and as Professor Chen mentioned that, without talking environmental management of all this dirty industry, it will be very, let's say, asymmetrical in terms of explaining what you want to do regarding reducing emissions. If there is a huge amount of industrial emitters over there, but you are saying that this company is net zero, it will not help in terms of explaining to the public, and it will result some kind of backlash, or it will not connect the people to the problem itself. That's my point as well. Using clean industry, using clean air, more railways, better housing, affordable housing through climate policies, something helpful rather than saying GHG or rather than saying decarbonization, etc. Therefore, I will repeat myself again, the climate policy communication is something important at the same time. That's why my reference goes to there. And for example, in our case, in Turkey, there is an external pressure rather than internally established pathway. We are using European Green Deal as a kind of pressure mechanism. We are referring to Paris Agreement, but I think we need to develop our own story. And if we are always citing to external pressures, external things, it will not help really in terms of explaining the policy making to the public level. I think while checking my notes, I just forgot to say that as well. Reference to your story, yeah. Turkey could develop being zero polluting country rather than net zero country. Okay, at the end of the day, if you became a zero polluting country together with publicly available zero pollution data at the installation level, including their permits, including their commitment results, you will be also able to develop in terms of GHG emissions by using best available technologies, by using industrial emission directive, permitting rules, etc. That's why this is my point, and I think it adds to reduction better than directly talking on GHG emissions. And for the next part, as suggestions for the public policy making, I think in our case we have very legislative driven country. We are not a country like UK. We love legislation. The public service is very bound to what is available on the paper, on the law. at least some extent. Although we have good laws, they are not implemented in a good way. But for the climate case, if we could have sectoral distribution, sectoral reduction targets as a binding target, like EU, for example, EU made ETC sectors, non-ETC sectors, and land use change, and forestry sectors. They all covers economical sectors, and they define certain targets to that sectors. What is needed is that in order to reduce short-termism when changing the political cycles. And I think we need to also change the national budgeting system. I mean, we need to think more climate budgeting. It will also directly impact the investments, and it will make a real regional development perspective as well. I mean, nowadays, in our case, we have doing policy making from top to bottom, and we don't have regional development part of that story, which is also very relevant to how to use your money in the decaying sectors, in the decaying regions, etc. That's why I think including climate budgeting to national budgeting process is something very helpful. It will stay there even the government change, the rule is changed, and therefore you need to consider that. And final note, and I think building the institutions are so important, and gathering the right people. I mean, nowadays working at the public bodies is not something fancy or something good for the talented people. I think we need to also make it more, let's say, excited place or the nice place to work there as a public servant, as a public body officer, etc. We need that people in order to being resilient to governmental shifts, etc. Yeah, I think these are my main impressions in order to increase the resilience of the climate policies.
Thank you, Dursun. That some quite provocative things, especially that last one on making sure that we strengthen public institutions through having, I mean, what I think you're essentially suggesting is a stronger bureaucracy, a better human, resources there. I'm just going to note that because we just had a very strong debate inside ICM in terms of how to strengthen climate governance through strengthening the public sector. But definitely something that should be looked at. And I think I'm going to use this as a segue to our third and final section. Thank you, Dursun, which is one transition, many approaches. So just like we were saying during this past round, it seems like there's a trend towards convergence in terms of what needs to be done in each country, but essentially it's different depending on the context. So I'd like to put on the table the following question. So how do you see your country, its economy, and its society in a world where a 1.5 degree or 2-degree pathway is the norm? So what do you think needs to be done this decade, so 20 years after the Paris Agreement, to get us on that course? And to start off this third and last round, I'm going to break a little bit the order and start with our colleagues from Russia, Dr. Makarov. I know that you have to leave a bit early, so that's why I'm going to start with you, and then we'll get back to Camila and continue with our regular order. Dr. Makarov, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm okay with timing actually now, but still I'm being very pleased to start anyway. I think that it is a very correct message that transitions may be different. And so, of course, they should be dependent on the national context. Russian national context, for example, is very specific because of the Russian climate, first of all. For example, while in Germany, the ratio of heat production, heat generation, and electricity generation is 40%, all right? In Russia, it is 160%. Renewables, for example, are very good for producing electricity, but they are not very good in producing heat. This is one of the reasons why renewables are not very popular in Russia and are not economically competitive so far in most of the regions of Russia, though, of course, there are some exceptions. And of course, the context of other countries may be different. But for example, in Russia, we have the principle which is officially promoted, the principle of technological neutrality. So which means that any ways to reduce emissions are good. So we should not discriminate specific ways of decarbonization compared to the others. And with this principle, Russia is strongly against the attempts to impose any restrictions on fossil fuels, which some countries try to promote, that we should phase out of fossil fuels. Russia is sure that fossil fuels will be in energy mix, but of course, fossil fuels should be cleaner. And the shift from coal to gas is also decarbonization, according to the Russian perspective, right? And like the development of fossil fuels associated with carbon capture and storage, it is also the way of decarbonization, and so on and so forth. And nuclear energy is also one of the options which Russia develops in the context of decarbonization. It is, of course, low carbon, actually nearly zero carbon way to produce energy, and Russia promotes it extensively. And Russia in nuclear, it is one of the sectors where Russia sees win-win from energy transition. So on the one hand, we are very strong in it, and we may export nuclear reactors to other countries, including small modular reactors to other countries. On the other hand, it is, of course, green in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, at least, right? And at the same time, it is very like technological advanced sector where Russia also sees the opportunity to develop its competence, to develop other sectors of the economy around nuclear, and so on. So at the same time, Russia is very, very rich on in forests, and Russia considers ecosystems as and ecosystems management, nature-based solutions as one of the key tracks of coping with climate change. So, and it is often underestimated, and Russia sees that it should be recognized and as one of the key tracks. But however, despite all this, I can't say that Russia has a very well-developed vision of its own economy and the global economy in the low-carbon context. And of course, it should be developed much more in detail. So right now, there are specific directions that are clear for my country, right? And which may be like advantages of my country in the low carbon world. But however, from these directions to some combined comprehensive vision, there is still a long track. But for sure, this message that pathways to low carbon future may be different across countries. It is one thing in which Russia insists, and it will continue to insist in future.
Thank you, Dr. Makarov. I think a lot of these points could give way for much deeper discussion, and I think a lot of us are like, what do you think about this? What do you think about? I'd really like to dive deeper, but I do want to also hear the perspective from our other colleagues. So I'm going to switch back to the Western Hemisphere with Camila. So Camila, what is your perspective on the transition at 1.5 or 2.0 world from your view in Argentina? Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Carlos. So, well, if I have to imagine an 1.5, I mean, it's very difficult, but if I have to imagine a 1.5 compatible pathway in Argentina, I don't imagine only a country with lower emissions. Of course, reducing emissions and accelerating the transition away from fossil fuels is very important, but that alone is not enough. So for us, I say France, right? But for us, 1.5 pathway should also mean stronger protection of ecosystems, territories, and biodiversity, of course. Of course, as well, greater participation of affected communities in decision-making processes and developing models that are more resilient and less dependent of extracted activities. Also, I would say that Argentina is already experiencing severe climate impacts, as many other countries as well. And these impacts are not distributed equally, so they affect territories and communities in very different ways, especially those already facing social and economic vulnerabilities. So I think that adaptation and prevention needs to become much more central in climate policies and in this 1.5, let's say, compatible pathway. Then I also think that we need to move beyond a discussion that focuses only on technological replacement. A just transition cannot simply mean replacing fossil fuel with renewable energy while reproducing the same inequalities, concentration of power, or environmental pressures on territories and ecosystems. So, in this sense, I imagine that a country with more diversified economies and energy systems as well, let's say stronger local and subnational capacities, more decentralized solutions and public policies that prioritize social well-being, access to energy, water, food, mobility, and healthy environments. And I think that my last point should be participation. So participation mechanisms and processes are also key. So one of the lessons from these 10 years is that transitions cannot be sustainable if they are imposed from the top down or if they reproduce these territorial inequalities that I mentioned before. So I think that communities, workers, indigenous peoples, local governments, academia, well, and of course civil society need to be meaningfully involved in shaping these transition pathways. Of course, in the energy sector, but as well, and as and my colleagues mentioned before, there are other sectors that are very important in these transitions. For example, the industrial one, well, the agriculture sector as well. So for me, I think that a 1.5 compatible future in Argentina requires building a new political, social, environmental, economic consensus centered in people and territories. Just that. Thank you.
Thank you, Camila. I also find it very important to understand that maybe, and I agree that this is not just a change in the way that the economy works, the emissions changing the technology. There's also a system where economy is embedded. So yeah, I totally agree that we need to think about an alternative future. Thank you. Now let's move on to China. Dr. Shah, if you could share with us what does the 1.5 or 2.0 future look like from the Chinese perspective? And please feel free to be as brief as you'd like to, because I know you've already explained previously the move forward and that the debate in China is more between is it 1.5 or 2.0, but it's not so much about the target, having a target itself. Go ahead, Dr. Shah.
Hi, I think for this ambition of 2.5 or 2, it's not right now in China and in these decades. I think the very important is how to can continuously to persist on these policies to implement in every in that industry sector, and not only for government to the governance, and and important is to inspire to more companies and the factories to to improve their technologies and also the technologies and also the market and to achieve this 1.5, and that is, we think we'll do that. And I think another one is very important is to make to make more communication and from the government for the policymakers to the to at the end point is to the low carbon communities and to the consumption sides, and to get these and also this get the financial support and to let this economic can continuously to get the development that is in China, I think, because we also can see in the last year, maybe they are also the overdone. We take a little bit back, and the people maybe they are more fossil fuel power plant and set up because the people pay more attention to the economy, right? So I think if we can continue to do that, and yes, I believe that we can do that. We will continue to do that, and our government has more ambition to achieve that point, because in these decades we also have the beautiful China growth achieved in the past years at the 2035. That means carbon and also the blue sky and also green water under the we say that the green China, beautiful China grow. So but maybe because of the because of that the geopolitical pressures, and also we think about the energy securities, and so we have more challenges to face, and we have to more innovation techniques to get implement. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shah, for those reflections from China. And last but not least, I do want to turn to you, Dursun, to hear your perspective from Turkey. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, thank you as well. And I think I need to start with the real NDC for the 1.5 degree aligned NDC. In our current case, our updated NDC is defining emission increase rather than decrease. I mean, we are increasing our total GHG emissions with respect to 2080 by 20% something. I think, first of all, what we could set as a real and the science-based target, which will be a kind of public policy machine. I mean, it could direct your public policy if you could provide a real NDC, which means that at least you will not increase your total GHG emissions by 2035 or by 2030 anyway. But I think first need is to define absolute reduction in terms of workable NDC. That's why before imagining 2035, I need to have that NDC which provides a long pathway for the public policy making. And I like the notes of all three speakers. I will add on that. And I think when I imagine 10 years later, I just thought long, durable products and the long quality and the affordable houses and decreasing road transport and increasing railways and the public transport in all large cities and the industry policy that together works with energy policy plus environmental policy. These are my kind of imaginary things, but the mathematics of GHG emissions are so straightforward. If you reduce your buildings emissions, if you reduce your transportation emissions, and if you reduce your industrial emissions, you will get something near to zero. But the political economy of the climate change, I mean, the definition of the problem is something needs to be changed as well. Climate change is a kind of symptom rather than the problem itself. It's the result of the problem, how we define it is something very important. We need to also change the way of looking to the climate change concept as a not as a result, but as a result, but not a problem. The problem itself just lying with the how we are producing, how we are consuming, how our tax policy is working, how our public money distribution is working. That's why we need to think about more social policies in order to have better climate projection by 2035. And in addition to that, I think being open and establishment of publicly available monitoring systems for public policy making, climate policy making is very helpful in order to watch what we are doing, what the local level is doing, what regional level is doing, and then what is central level is doing. Therefore, I think publicly available systems. We are living in a digital times. I mean, for the policy making, we need to that. At the same time, I think we need also publicly available monitoring system for the dirty industry, including the high emitter, high GHG emitter industries as well. Access to information and monitoring the performance is something very important in order to support public bodies as well. You know, the power asymmetry is something very visible in terms of relations to the application of the rules and enforcement of the rules. Therefore, this is some tool in order to help to make the public power asymmetry is more balanced version. And yeah, other than that, I'm checking my notes. I think these are my main impressions regarding the 10 years later.
Thank you, Dursun, for those insights. I'm afraid that we've run out of time today. I do want to thank our panelists for joining us and our live audience for accompanying us. This virtual roundtable has been recorded and will be posted in the Climate Transparency social networks, specifically on YouTube, on Spotify. The second edition of the A Decade from Paris Country Notes collection will be available for download through our social media and website www.climate-transparency.org. What do you think about the first 10 years of the Paris Agreement and the next decade? Feel free to leave your comments in any of our social media, including also our LinkedIn and Instagram channels. Thanks again for joining us, and see you all in the next one.
Thank you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That's the end of the recording. I do want to